Because what I want to do is I want to try to inform you what the NHGOP is doing, my vice chair hat. I also want to talk to you about what's happening statewide in education, which I know is a paramount topic. So I want to put on my State Board of Education hat. And then I'll also cross just my personal and professional experiences kind of interweaved within there. So I'm hopefully able to cover a lot of ground, and also maybe you get a little sense of who I am personally within that time. So I want to start off with statewide education issues to dovetail some of what was written in your agenda today. And I want to talk about why what we're discussing at a statewide level and what you're tackling is important, and I want to give you context as to why it's important and what issues we're actually facing. The first reason why education is important, public education is important, is because most young people will always go to a public school. About 90% and sometimes about 85% of students will always go to their local K through 12 public education school. And we should also be proud of the fact that America has a system of public education that by and large is actually doing a lot of good. So what's the issues that we actually are talking about? What's this culture war that we're actually discussing? The culture war is really mainly focused on a few tenets that go into education and the foundation that education rests upon. The culture war really resides in, first, what students are learning and how they're being taught certain key areas. The second one is a little bit more under the surface, but it's one that we formally know in mainstream as CRT, but what I'll elaborate to you is actually the actual threat is the ideology of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and sometimes known as justice. I want to talk on that. But to talk about the first pillar of what we're actually discussing in this culture war, what children learn and how, let me unwind that a little bit. There's a big movement in this country that asks the question of should we still be relying on merit and standards in education? Topics like race and demographic background, adequacy, how students are performing on testing. These are questions and topics that you always hear in national conversations, and you hear them in statewide conversations. You hear that minority students are underperforming on standardized testing. You hear that specifically Black and Spanish students are underperforming at higher rates than other students across the country. That's true in New Hampshire, it's true nationally. You also hear outside of demographic disparities that on average, students in K through 12 public education are underperforming. What that looks like nationally is that roughly about 45% of all fourth graders across the country for the past 2 decades have not performed at grade level in science or in math. What that looks like nationally is that 64% of Black American seniors, 12th grade high school students, cannot perform at grade level in math specifically. In fact, most high school Black graduating seniors in this country lack basic arithmetic skills. If you look back a little lower into the early education phases, what you're seeing is developmentally inappropriate material being put into schools. So while we have a performance standard problem on the outcome side, students are graduating without performing at grade level, you have an input problem in early education about what are students learning, when, and how. And what I would argue to this group is the reason why most reasonable parents across this country are concerned, rightfully concerned, is because what young people are learning, younger and younger, is developmentally inappropriate first, and secondly, it's pseudoscience, and then the third part that encapsulates it all is it's actually anti-American. And I'm going to outline how all that bleeds into some of the bigger issues that we have. Well, how is it developmentally inappropriate? Well, the reason why parental rights is important is because there are several school districts in New Hampshire and nationally that believe that students' sexual identities, their gender identities, is something that parents don't have the right to know from teachers. At the heart of SB 272, what is actually being discussed is policies like in Manchester and in Nashua, where their policies are explicitly written to say that if a student vocalizes their sexual identity or gender identity to a teacher or an educator or anybody in a schoolroom, that nobody in that school has the responsibility to communicate it to the parent or the family. In fact, it goes even more to say that even if a parent, a family, or a caregiver asks specifically about their child's gender or sexual identity, that the teacher is to lie and in fact hide that information from parents, caregivers, and families. Now, in this room, I don't have to tell y'all why that's wrong. If you're a Republican, first of all, in our platform, it has that parents have the fundamental right for their children's well-being and education. So just from a party standpoint, it's clear that we believe that parents and families have the rightful place within their kids' lives. That, from a party standpoint, is clear. But then somebody brought up the polling that shows that about 70%, and I would argue it's a bigger number, actually support parental rights in schools and believe that schools should be able to be transparent with their parents. So why have Democrats voted against it? The reason why Democrats vote against it is because what they do very well is they turn rightful, very concentrated efforts for us into completely different stories in the media. What started as a conversation about parents and caregivers wanting full transparency in schools from teachers, something very obvious, was spinned into what was called anti-LGBTQ legislation and anti-trans legislation. That talks about the developmental inappropriateness. I could go and elaborate to you some of the extremely concerning material that I've seen as a State Board of Education member. And just for the people in the room, the State Board of Education has a few charges. We renew charter schools, we approve charter schools, we approve Learn Everywhere programs, we serve as an adjudicated function between school boards and parents and families if they have problems that they can't fix out themselves, and we also write the rules that follow legislation around education. So when I'm on the state board, also one of our charges is to pass curriculum for higher institutions. So when Keene State needs new accreditation standards, they come to the state board every 7 or 10 years. And I've been a part of those conversations in the 3 years that I've been there. What I'll tell you is that that second pillar that's degrading our schools, the component that I'm talking about, the DEIJ, what I would argue to you is that is the most corrosive ideology that not only affects our education system, but by nature affects our entire democracy and the Constitution that we live under. I could talk to you about how some of the materials that I see show adults giving oral sex to transgender other adults that are given to children as young as 11 years old. I could tell you about graphic novels that are written in comic book form with colorful pictures and bubble pullouts that on its face look like basic comics, but when you look at them are actually showing young children how to use sexual apps, condoms, sexual devices, and how to masturbate. But that's actually looking too closely at what the problem is, because the problem is that as conservatives, we have a really tough bridge to cross. As conservatives, we believe in small government. We don't want government to intrude in our lives. We believe in individual responsibility. We believe in local control, specifically in New Hampshire. We love local control. The problem we face as conservatives is that these localities want this to be exposed to their children. That's the issue. The issue is that in Manchester, overwhelmingly the school board supports this type of effort. In fact, when several school board members are explicitly asked whether it's appropriate for young underage children to be shown sexual images, adults participating in oral sex, transgender men giving oral sex to transgendered women, when asked if this is appropriate to be shown to groups of students as young as 11 years old, they emphatically say yes. So the issue that we have as Republicans and as conservatives is that we are rightfully concerned about the issues. However, our hands are tied in how much government should be used to control these issues. This is the classic example that you hear with Ron DeSantis, the fight against Disney. How much does the government interfere when it goes off a course? That's a question that I honestly don't know the answer to, and I'm hoping that we can answer some questions to figure out what that limit is. But what I do know is that young children are being exposed to pornography. Pornography, as defined by the Supreme Court, is you know it when you see it, and I've seen it and I definitely know it's pornography. I want to move on past the inappropriate developmental content and move on to the bigger issue that I'm discussing about DEIJ, diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. Now, as you read from my brief bio, I'm actually from New Orleans, Louisiana. I moved here in 2011 on an academic scholarship to go to SNHU. I graduated in 2014. By the time I graduated, I had already hiked my first couple of mountains. I had already seen snow, so I fell in love with the place. I stuck around. And what I've seen is something very interesting, because as you see here, I'm a Black American male standing in front of you. As a Black American man in New Hampshire, coming from New Orleans and coming from Louisiana, Louisiana is one of the most highly populated and Black populations in the country. Inversely, New Hampshire is one of the most underrepresented in Black populations in the country. And so by nature, when people meet me for the first time, they ask me, how in the world can you live in New Hampshire? And it's actually quite simple. It's because New Hampshire, like the rest of the country, isn't judging me on the color of my skin. I've never once in this state, in anybody who is like-minded of myself, or actually very rarely have I encountered anybody who even asked me about my race, ever. I got here on merit with an academic scholarship, and the lifestyle that I've been able to provide for myself and my family, I've been blessed with through merit. I created a hair care company that sold nationally. I work as a director of Salt Beauty Brands, which makes and manufactures USA made-owned products right here in Derry, New Hampshire. We ship them out of Manchester. I've been blessed with that opportunity. But the reason why I was given that opportunity from God is because opportunity is when preparation and luck intercede. And what that means for me is most of my life, I didn't have control over the way I was being raised. My mother was making sure that I was showing up to school on time. My mother was making sure that she was driving me an hour and a half to a charter school across the other side of New Orleans and picking me up afterwards at school practice. My mom made sure that in the summer times I wasn't sitting around the house, that I was always in some type of summer school program or extracurricular program. My grandmother is the one that, regardless of how much me and my cousins kicked and screamed, I was going to be at Sunday school, the first one, and we were going to be the last ones picking chairs up at the end of service. That's just the way I was raised. And so even though I raised in New Orleans, which is a very dangerous environment, always has been in the top murder categories across the United States since I've been alive, I was very insulated with a loving, reading-led, learning-led household. So why am I bringing up myself? I'm bringing up myself because the only times I've ever been discriminated against, the only times that I've ever been called a racially charged word or term, the only time that I've ever been attacked morally or publicly is by Democrats. The only time that I just want to repeat what I'm saying. I turned 32 years old on May 6th, not that long ago. I've actually been vice chair for the past 6 months, and it flies by. I just got elected in January, and I've been able to speak to over 20 groups and all across the state. I'm going to Berlin tomorrow, and I'm having a great job doing it because I want to get to y'all about all the good stuff that's happening at the NHGOP. I want to leave y'all with a little bit of dessert. But the reason why I brought this up is because DEIJ is the complete opposite to the actual reality of the life that I'm living. DEIJ literally preaches to young students that my life is impossible to them. In fact, it teaches young Black students that if you are Black in this country, because of systemic racism, because of racial disparities, you'll never be able to overcome your situation. You will have no upward mobility. This isn't allegory, this isn't soliloquy, this is written in the curriculum that schools are adopting and teaching to young students as young as 4th grade, when they're the most malleable, wet cement in their mind. DEIJ and diversity, equity, and inclusion professionals are often the most highly paid in school districts. There's a big conversation about schools always being underfunded, and education is underfunded. It's a lie. Public education has been the most funded through taxpayer dollars and property taxes in New Hampshire overwhelmingly in the past 2 decades. In fact, education spending in the past 2 decades has increased by 122% nationwide, while the average teacher salary nationwide has stagnated at 2% of growth in that same time frame. Where's the money going? It can't be that much more expensive to teach kids how to read, write, do arithmetic, and participate in civics. The reality is that schools are receiving the money, they're misspending it. Schools are overwhelmingly increasing their administrative burdens, superintendents, administrative positions, and they're also hiring DEI professionals to put all of this ideology onto younger and younger children. DEI professionals, like in Manchester, has a DEI and equity professional that leads all of the curriculum in the state. She, in fact, informs most of the curriculum that Manchester school districts teach. She expressly has written and believed that things like being on time, wearing a uniform, dressing well, reading the Bible. These are versions of systemic racism and white superiority and white supremacy. These are basic tenets of American society that are being reframed as white supremacist in an effort to frame the entire country, our entire system, as a white supremacist culture. The problem with all of this is that it's working. The issue with this is that communities, when they hear this message by and large, when they hear that you have to hire a diversity, equity, inclusion officer to not look racist, when they hear that you have to teach young children that they can underperform in their standards to make up for their racial disparities, that's fine. That when they hear that young children need to be told that biological men can become pregnant, that's fine. When we tell children across the board that just because you're poor or grew up in an underserved community, that you don't have the same access to opportunity, that's fine. They overwhelmingly support what I'm talking to you about today. That's the issue. So now if we roll over into this conversation about how can you support this? How can you hear this happening to young children and agree with this? How can these representatives that are on this paper that are Democrats vote along with what I just discussed to you about? The reality is that a lot of them agree with it. That's just a fact. We can sit here and scratch our head and try to understand why, but I think that that's a failed effort because the reality is that they just agree with it. Point blank. The other reality is that Democrats, by and large, vote as a bloc. Democrats, by and large, irregardless of their individual thoughts, because not all Democrats believe in this stuff, just so you understand, they vote as a bloc. They vote as a moving unit. They take their dictates from a national party. The national party dictates it down to their state chair. The state chair dictates it down to those who are elected. And that is the agenda that moves past. That's the reason why representatives in New Hampshire believe it's appropriate for New Hampshire citizens to abide by California standards. That's how you get the nationalization of state party efforts. Democrats, by and large, vote as a bloc. So what do we do about this? I'll tell you about a few things that are happening at the NHGOP to combat, but also play offense, because as Sue mentioned, I think we play a lot of defense. We get caught on our back heels quite a bit, but the reality is that we need to play offense. So what does that look like? When Chairman Ager and I first got elected, Chairman Ager started several outreach communities specifically focused on individual focuses. I lead two of them. The first one is the outreach to young Republicans and young right-of-center voters. The second one is the outreach to immigrant voters. There's several others. Faith-based community, 2A community, pro-life community. There's about 9 to 11 individual groups of Republicans that are going out and seeking the issues among these groups to help us be better informed. Not just because I'm helping to lead them, but truly because I believe there are most valuable efforts is in getting new voters and immigrant voters, which are the same efforts. New voters have two problems. We have a young person problem, which, to be honest with you, Joe, you're probably the youngest person I've seen attend one of these meetings other than myself.
My wife is younger.
We're all 32, yeah.
Everybody in this room here seems to be a lot younger than most of the groups, and that's no disrespect to any of our older citizens. It's just to highlight the fact that our party is like a melting ice cube. If we don't continue to get more people in our door, we will peter out. Why can't we get young people? What are we losing young people on? We're losing young people on social issues. It was very clear to us based on the midterm exit polling that young, college-educated, single women were the determining factor in our election. And they overwhelmingly broke with us on the threat of abortion because we were reframed on the issue. Democrats lied. Democrats framed us as the extremists. Democrats effectively painted a picture of us to a concerned voting population and won that debate. Our individual candidates did not clarify our message. The party dropped the ball to clarify the message. We ran no counter ads. When asked directly on different debate stages, individual candidates fumbled the ball in being able to communicate our position. And while most people in this room, I don't know all of you, would agree that life is life and should be protected, how closely it should be protected to life is the indisputable debate. And ultimately, now that the Dobbs decision has rolled down into state issue, the reality is that we dropped that ball and we paid big for it. We're losing young people on the threat of abortion. We're losing young people on overall societal values that are being pushed by the aforementioned effort that I talked about, DEIJ. You have young people now in college and high school that their entire experience in public education and higher education has been told that America is a racist country, that we're not the best country for human flourishing, that we're inherently racist if you're white, that you can't achieve if you're a minority. These are the underpinnings of the sentiments that we're seeing in voting habits. High school students that have graduated who have been in our system for 4 years, this is all they've learned. So we have a fundamental gap in conservative and Republican values and how young people are adopting them. We live in a society where I just ordered something off Amazon this morning, and I don't know how it gets here, but it was at my door before I came here today. We live in a society of fast money, fast fashion, fast accommodation. And so by nature, conservative values are on a decline. Marriages are on a decline. Belief in God and participation in church is on a decline. These are core conservative tenets that nationally are declining. And there's no backstop because of DEI erasing the proud history that we have and reframing it as racist. So what do? With New Republicans, I've been going around the state and speaking at colleges, and anyone who will have me hosting afternoon events, evening events at bars, doing educational-based type marketing, and doing everything I possibly can to talk about what it means to be a conservative. Should we be concerned? I realize we're all having fun, but like it is a fire alarm. Are we good to go? I think he's figuring it out. It's not a fire alarm? All right, cool. And so we have to get younger people by meeting them where they are. The reality is that as conservatives, I've been in so many rooms that we invoke notable names like Reagan. We always refer to Reagan. The reality is that you said y'all are 32, I'm 32 as well. When I'm among people my age and younger, they have no idea what Reagan even did. We're falling upon deaf ears. We're using messaging that no longer is resonating with the folks who are trying to get their vote. Don't get me wrong, I love Ronald Reagan. I love some of these figures who over the past 3 years have been torn down by leftist mobs across this country. The reality is that the reason why they're being torn down is because their history is being revised and rewritten or forgotten. Yep. We don't know these figures. And so as a party, we have almost a twofold effort. We have to mobilize and educate. But I believe that we can do both because I actually believe that through education, we can convert some of these voters over. That's the way I happen in business. I present my product. I present what my product does better than the other products. They make an informed decision to go with usually my product. I add a little zest. It helps that I have a great smile too, so that's a little something. But the reality is that we have not engaged a younger population with our ideas freshly, and we have not elaborated on them. We are talking to a group of people about wine who don't know what grapes are. That's a problem. And so when you talk about messaging and we talk about how do we message these issues, we have to rely and think from an education-only lens. It fires me up to hear a lot of what Democrats talk about. I thought that my role as a Republican and as a vice chair or even as an elected official was to constantly combat what they do. No, you're wrong. Here's the facts. I want to tell y'all something. That doesn't work. We are in a post-persuasion age where giving somebody the facts on an issue that you disagree with just doesn't work anymore. So we have to come from a position of strength and elaborate our ideas and message to 100 instead of messaging to 0. What does that mean? Messaging to 100 means that we're showing people where we want to go. High quality education means that there's 100% transparency. It means that there's school choice. It means that there's Learn Everywhere programs. Currently, what we do as conservatives is we say, Democrats bad, it's not this, it's not that, it's not that. We make detracting statements only. We try to combat what they say. That's not working. What we have to show Granite Staters is a clear vision of what it means to have Republicans in control of their tax dollars. What's on the line if students don't achieve at performance standards? We have to show them a picture of what it means to have a conservative state again. Because if we don't, they'll continue to have votes that win on emotion and illogical protest and activism. That's our charge. Another effort that I'm leading is working on messaging. I've gone throughout the entire state and worked with at least 20 different Republican groups, and we're putting together some key terms and charts and context to send around to all of your chairs and committees so that you can really have the full spectrum of these issues, like I discussed with education, and have some terms to be able to talk about them and write op-eds about them. And here's what I want to dovetail off into, because I do want to have some question and answer. We have a content problem. We don't have an ideas problem. A lot of us have great ideas. A lot of us have community withstanding. A lot of us have really deep-rooted connections. The issue is that we don't have content to show people what our ideas are. Videos, podcasts, quick recorded messages. That's what we need on top of the signage, the emailer campaigns. Frankly, me, Joe, Holly, we don't read the newsletters that get sent in the emails. Neither do the people younger than us do. If we don't start making videos and interactive content, we will lose this battle over and over again because we're losing sight of the young Republicans that are not taking in our message. There's a lot more I can talk to y'all about, and I'm hoping that we itch at some of it during the question and answer, but here's what I'm hoping you walk away with. The NHGOP is not sitting on their hands on any of these topics. The NHGOP has raised some of the most funds at this time of the year ever. So we're working with a bigger treasure chest than we've been working with prior. Chairman Ager hired a communications director to help different towns and committees get a handle on their education messaging, along with the messaging efforts that I'm putting out with terms and different contexts. I'm organizing some in-person trainings that are teaching debate and how to write op-eds. I'm hoping to have 3 or 4 of those before the end of the year. There's other trainings that will be offered. So the NHGOP as a foundation is really building up what it looks like to train candidates and help fund candidates and reach out to new candidates. Now our charge is to find who to run, teach them how to be successful, give them the context on these issues, and really hope to hold Democrats accountable and preach this message of being unapologetically real and using the truth as the weapon that we have. Because at this point, that's all we can really rely on. And so I want to open it up to some question and answer. I realize that I cannot cover everything at once, but I'm sure y'all have some stuff out there that you want to hear from. Yeah, go ahead.
In Hollis, we have this pack of mean people, and they like herd together, and they're very powerful, and they get their messages across, and they're just mean about it. You cannot talk to them. I've tried. But they're not nice. How do you handle that group, this herd of mean girls or whoever they are? They're just extremely powerful in this town.
Yeah, the short answer is ignore them. The long answer is I'm very familiar, as I mentioned, the only time I've ever been called anything racist or treated discriminatory is from Democrats and people left of center. I've been called an Uncle Tom, the black face of white supremacy. Somehow I was called the New Hampshire Clarence Thomas as a problem, and I was like, okay, I didn't realize that was an insult. I actually felt underqualified to receive it.
Take it.
I was like, oh great, that's crazy. But the reason why I said ignore them is because you're not going to convert somebody whose heels are dug into the sand. And you certainly aren't going to convert anybody who their primary job is to yell at you and to decry that whatever you think is the wrong thing. And so I actually think that our conservative reaction to trying to correct those people completely removes our efforts to try to beat those people. And so you're going to have people that don't like what we do regardless of how far left or right that you are. The reality that we're facing is that no matter how moderate you are in this party, you're going to be labeled as a January 6th Trump extremist. That doesn't say anything about my support to Trump. It just means that to most left and Democrats, all Republicans are the problem. And so that's another issue that we're facing in our party, is that we have a civil war almost happening in our party.
Yeah.
Who's the true Republican and who's not? Who's a rhino and who's not? Who supports Trump and who doesn't? The reality is that if we don't solve this internal issue about who's Republican enough, I'll tell you who isn't Republican, and that's Democrats. And so when we fight each other, like for example, the Democrats that voted against us on SB 272, that's a major loss to have up to 4 Republicans voting with Democrats against something as important as parental rights. It fired me up. I had to hold myself back from calling out their names, from calling the Belknap County chair, from really being heavy-handed in trying to ask why would they do that. But here's the reality. When we have this tight of a margin, if we lose any Republican during a legislative session, we're losing much more major battles than just SB 272. So I don't know how to solve this internal dispute. I don't know what the Turing test is for being a true Republican or a rhino. I truly don't. But what I do understand is that this is me speaking to you, Ryan Terrell, happened to be your vice chair. I think it behooves us to continue to cater towards the left and moderate ourselves in this battle. I think that it's important for us to completely be unapologetically about what we believe in, because the more that we moderate, the more that I think our party's values are lost in that struggle. So I hope it doesn't answer your question fully, but it just acknowledges that there are some groups who we simply can't talk to, but there are a big group of independents who are politically homeless that we need to be talking to right now.
Yes. Yep.
I saw your hand go up.
What is your opinion if the Democrats have a couple people waver? What do you think they are told? In other words, if Joe Manchin goes off the reservation, what do you think happens to somebody like him?
When Democrats vote against the party platform, they are primaried, they are rallied against with funding, and they are voted out of office.
So, follow-up reason I ask that is, when we have our Republicans leave the reservation, if I heard you right, you said, well, let's take a step back and pick and choose which fight we want. So that sounds to me like we're not fighting with the same fire that the Democrats won't tolerate it. It's just my opinion, but I think if we keep walking the way where we want to pick and choose, we're going to lose opportunities, because they know that we're going to.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. So I actually agree with you. I don't think it's appropriate for us to walk away. So me diagnosing the problem, certainly I don't want it to be confused that me solving the issue is to walk away. I actually believe the issue is solved the same way, that we primary people who vote against our platform and we elect Republicans that will vote with our platform. Here's the issue with these specific Republicans that I'm discussing. They get the most votes in their entire district. They're the top vote getters, they're the top fundraisers, and they're also supported by a left of center PAC that overwhelmingly helps to support their campaign. The other more foundational issue that we have is we struggle to have people to replace them. Democrats have rank and file people across all spectrums, including young people, that they can rank and file and push the next person up to replace them, when in fact we have a large roster problem that even if we were to have people that we don't want to be sitting in those seats, we struggle to actually get viable candidates to replace them. So I agree with you. I think that those people should be primary and replaced, because we're losing critical problems like SB 272 because of their votes. At the same time, we're hamstrung by our inability to fill their positions and beat the voting populations that are actually sending them to office. And so that, by nature, gives me the only resolve that we try to work with them while they're elected, but keeping in mind when it is time to run against them, that's the positions that we look to fill. So it's a really tough problem to solve. I wish we were like the Democrats, that we had several people that we could drum up. I wish that we had an access of out-of-state funding to replace and run campaigns. The reality is we're not as nimble, so we have to deal with the cards that we're dealt, unfortunately.